Storm is growing even larger, and joining us right now to talk about the role not only the federal government is playing, but specifically the EPA is playing, is EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt here on the Chad Hasty Show. Administrator Pruitt, thanks for joining us today. Glad to hear from you.
Chad, good to be with you today, and I hope, having been from that part of the country and living in that part of the country over the last many, many years, I hope the prayers are with folks there in Texas as we're responding to this situation, and appreciate the opportunity to tell a little bit about what we're doing to help serve the folks there.
Well, and I appreciate you coming on. And one of the I thought it was great when I heard yesterday that you were going to be able to come on because obviously people, they hear about FEMA and the role FEMA is playing. Obviously, they hear that the president's going to be making a trip down to the state of Texas today. But when you hear about the EPA, it may not be one of the things that, is on the top of people's minds. But y'all are focusing on what's happening because there will be an environmental side to all of this, correct?
Yeah, there were activities taking place even before the storms hit. Governor Abbott and I were in communication last week, Thursday, Friday time frame. He was anticipating the need to provide some waivers, requesting fuel waivers from the EPA. And what that means is that, as you know, to meet certain Clean Air Act requirements, there are certain gasolines that have to be blended in the area of Texas, and which puts pressure on refineries and the rest. And so during storms like this, Chad, states will request waivers from having to produce a certain type of gasoline so that supplies are not impacted and people have access to fuel. And so last week on Friday, actually, the governor sent that paperwork to us, and we got that done well in advance of the storm hitting in earnest. So that was something that provided certainty to the folks in the area. And when you look at the, obviously, safe drinking water, the wastewater systems in Texas, we have about 300 or so that we feel like may be vulnerable that we're monitoring, and then obviously the monitoring that goes on with respect to potential spills. So we're working in conjunction with the state authorities, TCEQ. In fact, we've sent personnel to Austin, personnel to Denton, there at the Federal Response Center, and deployed additional personnel to make sure that we're undergirding and supporting the state response.
Well, how long do those waivers last for, and is it possible for the governor, if he needs to submit for more waivers?
Yes, actually, he submitted a second,
okay.
I think a day or so later, to cover more counties in Texas. So we've actually granted two of those to date, and they are granted to mid-September time frame. There may be a need to extend those, but based upon how the storm responds and how and the longevity of it. But that's something that's in place at least until mid-September. And that's not, when we look in years past with storms that hit in certain areas of the country, access to water, also making sure that we have fuel, obviously the power grid is something that's very important. But, from our perspective, Chad, we have to go in and assess environmental hazards before people come back into those areas. So as citizens are trying to repopulate and get back into their homes and get back into the affected areas, we want to make sure that we're being responsive and expeditious in helping, assess those areas so that they know they're safe going back in. These floodwaters, testing these floodwaters. So we are working diligently to do that. The president was on cabinet calls all weekend, this past weekend. He has shown, in my estimation, great leadership to this process. He's told us to put people first, paperwork second. Make sure that we lean into this situation, and I think we've leaned into it in a way in advance of the storm and during the storm, and as it continues to make sure we're serving folks effectively, prayerfully.
As most people know, we've got a lot of refineries and a lot of energy off the coast of Texas, and we have some refineries that are shut down. Are we hearing about any leaks or anything going on there that people need to be concerned about, or does it look as though people took care of business before the storm hit and we might be okay?
We have not had any reports of any concerns there. In fact, there's about last number of gallons, 516,000 gallons of refining capacity are being impacted, I think, shut down presently. Hopefully those are going to be able to come back on soon. But, our private sector companies and industry did a great job in advance of the storm preparing, and I think prayerfully we'll continue to see that protected over the next few days. But no reports as of yet.
Good. We're visiting with EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt here on the Chad Hasty Show, talking about the EPA's role in response to Hurricane Harvey. Let's look, I guess, long term, because obviously everyone's focused on what's happened on the coast right now and in the Houston area. How long will the EPA be monitoring what's happening in Houston and the Gulf Coast when specifically dealing with Harvey?
Well, look, I mean, I think that when you look at these kinds of storms, there are multiple issues that we are dealing with along with the state. I mean, debris removal. Where do you put the debris, and how is it impacting landfills in the area, and making sure that we don't have hazardous waste or hazardous substances going into landfills, to risk, water supply and the rest. And so that's one element of it. The wastewater treatment facilities. We will continue to monitor those to make sure that any vulnerabilities that we are aware of and working with local towns and cities to ensure or to work toward making sure that there's no problems there. So those kinds of issues, Chad, are ongoing. And then when you look at the assessment, as far as environmental hazards, for people to get back in, first responders, but in addition to that, citizens to go back into the affected areas to repopulate, rebuild. We will be involved with the TCEQ to make sure that there are no environmental hazards posing risk to citizens as they go back in. So I actually gave direction to our leadership team. I've been in constant contact with Sam Coleman, who's the head of Region 6 based in Dallas. I gave him direction to make sure that we oversupply to get people into the, personnel into the area to support TCEQ. This is a coordinated response. You mentioned FEMA. FEMA is taking each of the federal agencies that have a role in this matter and making sure that they're all integrated. FEMA is doing a great job, in my estimation, at doing that. And then we're also working with the state partners, the governor's office, the TCEQ, to make sure that we are cohesively impacting folks in a positive way and helping serve them in an effective way.
EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, we appreciate your time today, and we wish you and everyone else who's involved in the response and the cleanup and the aftermath of Hurricane and Tropical Storm Harvey. We wish you the best of luck.
Godspeed to you all.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. That's EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt here on the Chad Hasty Show.